Thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate the fact that you're here.
Thank you for the invite.
So you've stepped into the CEO role at a really challenging time. Of course, COVID's been impacting operations pretty heavily. We've seen a significant regional and domestic economic contraction. How's business now coming into the fourth quarter?
Business actually has been surprisingly robust. We've had a large cohort of people that have come into our system, and we have over 3,000 companies that are registered. We have actually quite an interesting backlog of companies, individuals, family offices, and foundations that are making applications. So in that sense, we're very fortunate, and I would put us in the category of the people who have sort of emerged from the post-pandemic world on the right side of things. So overall, thumbs up.
I think when you look at the economic situation here, given the contraction that we saw and the expat exodus from Dubai and Abu Dhabi, that the thinking was that the situation might get worse before it gets better. But do you think we're behind that now? We're entering into a new phase of growth?
Actually, yes. I think that's correct. We are entering a new phase of growth. And I also think that the leadership of this country has recognized the importance of bringing in and retaining expatriate talent, which will help them grow the economy in the new directions that they've picked. So by eliminating a lot of the uncertainty associated with the visa situation, they've actually sent an unambiguous signal to interested parties that the UAE is open for business, which I think is very important. And you're seeing actually particularly younger people coming in, professionals, people with experience, which is good for the country.
And the UAE is definitely on show at the moment. Expo is now underway. I want your take on this because this is a major capital works program. It comes at significant expense. So what is the return on the UAE's multi-billion-dollar Expo investment going to be in your view?
So the return has to be calibrated from a financial standpoint, money expended, money coming in. And I think there will be people coming in and also staying for a few extra days, just for holidays. But you also need to measure, which is difficult to do in a financial sense, of the signaling of that we're back in business, the country's open, and things are happening here. So between the two, I think the results are very positive. But if you ask me to actually give you the numbers, I don't know them.
So it's more likely, I guess, that the return is going to be non-financial. Would you agree?
I would think that the non-financial return is very important from a signaling, standpoint, and also from showing the world that the country is open again. And we came through the pandemic. We're back in business. So yes, to answer your question.
So, we've come through what is about 2 years of COVID now. What is ADGM doing to enhance Abu Dhabi's image as a business and financial hub as we come into this new era of business, if you will? It's a hybrid model. The future of work is no longer necessarily location-based. Is that going to be a challenge for you?
So to answer your first question in terms of what is ADGM doing in an Abu Dhabi context, I think ADGM is trying to leverage everything that Abu Dhabi has pulled together, which makes ADGM a success for attracting essentially businesses, corporations, individuals, foundations. So that's what we're doing. What was your second question?
If the future of work is no longer location-based, what does that mean for hubs like Abu Dhabi and for ADGM's efforts to attract and retain people to come here to do business?
Well, first of all, we're looking at the world as one where going forward it's a hybrid environment. And most people will agree with this statement, but the reality is that most people will also not fully embrace it. So there's a tendency to say, oh, this is how the world has changed, but it hasn't really impacted me. Or it's not that much, it's on the fringes. We've all discovered that you can, in fact, A, work from home. B, it's important to come to the office periodically to reconnect with your environment. This face-to-face is very different than being on a Zoom or Teams call. But you can be on a Zoom and Teams call and participate if you don't have time to go to a meeting that's, let's say, in another building or across town. So all of us are in experimental mode. Now, there have been people who have worked from home for some time, and those are the fortunate ones because for them, there was no period of adaptation. But for the rest of us, we have to learn. And what ADGM is doing is it's essentially creating an environment that is welcome to both the traditional business and also the people that are very comfortable working in a hybrid way.
So what else are you doing specifically to make this place work?
So it's in terms of the number of visas that we offer, as opposed to linking that everyone has to have, has to be here. So we're being flexible in our registration process and understanding that the world is not the same way that it was 2 years ago.
And as it stands, what do you think the biggest challenge for Abu Dhabi is right now and for this institution?
That's an interesting question. And this might be a namby-pamby answer, but I believe it. So here goes. I think the challenge here is that the story of ADGM in Abu Dhabi, which is, just to enumerate it very quickly, common law, very important, access to capital, multiple pools of capital. Then you've got time zone advantage, safety, right? They've emerged from this pandemic with actually good credentials. Then on top of it, you've got, you've got taxation, right, which is 0%. You've got good infrastructure, expenses. If you compare, for instance, the top jurisdictions that are comparable to ADGM, in terms of expenses, Hong Kong is the most expensive city in the world. 5th most expensive city is Singapore, and the 10th is Beijing. And I think Geneva and Zurich are like 7 and 8, New York is 9, something like that. London is 6. Abu Dhabi is number 39. So that's so that's another advantage. That it's not an expensive place to operate from. And finally, you've got we talked about the visas, which is very important, and you've got a regulatory regime and a regulator who understands business, therefore is sophisticated and can handle kind of the new way things are being done. So all those together, if you think about that package, it's there, right? You can't pretend it's something else. But our challenge is to essentially, promote the package without degrading it. So it's a great story, it's real, but you don't want to flog it. So you want to be much more subtle about it. So that's how I think our biggest challenge.
I think what's more important is the fact that when it comes to attracting and retaining businesses, what we see is regional competition rising. In Saudi Arabia, for example, we know there's been recent moves to try and take business away from the UAE. So what is ADGM doing, and Abu Dhabi in particular doing, to ensure that this place remains the regional financial and business hub?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, if you think of the world in terms of zero sum, one could take that angle. I would say, because I've spent all my life in investments and in trading and on trading desks and in banks, when I look at a place, at a jurisdiction, what I think about is, what are the benefits of being there? And there are multiple ones, right? Because here, it's easy to move your family, it's easy to live here, right? And yes, you have the rule of law, and yes, you have the pools of capital, and yes, you have the visa situation. So it's the package. And I would say, you know what? Come and take a look. That's what I say to people. Come and take a look. If you're an astute business person and you want to protect your business, come and take a look. And I think once you've spent 2-3 days in Abu Dhabi, if you haven't, you'll know the answer to your question very easily.
So you don't think the reforms that Saudi Arabia is making are going to come at a cost to its neighbors?
I don't think it's going to have a dramatic negative impact on Abu Dhabi. No.
Okay, let's talk about capital market reforms as well. With regards to what ADGM needs to do in order to promote capital market development here, what are some of the next steps that you're going to be looking at? Because this is obviously a major national focus. There's a variety of exchanges here as well. We know there's new listings coming up too in the pipeline, ADNOC drilling, for example, in the mix. What needs to be done from a capital market development perspective in the UAE, in your view?
So look, everything that's happened in the West is coming here in one way, shape, or form, including SPACs, right? So without being specific about what's the next thing, the importance, if you think about it from a regulatory standpoint, and this is what I was alluding to about our regulator being understanding and being kind of business friendly, is you have to understand how markets operate. In that sense, you have to be quick to be able to respond to the changes in the capital markets. And I guess at some point you will ask about the crypto world. And again, our team here has actually been quite advanced in developing a framework for assessing and regulating the virtual assets. This is coming. You can't, I don't know if the expression is the cat is out of the bag or, it's here. It's not going away. So the sooner people deal with it, the sooner the regulatory infrastructure is put in place, the more type of that kind of business you will see. So that's to answer your question, you need to have a regulator that understands, is responsive, and is quick.
There has been one view out there that perhaps consolidation of the exchanges would make sense. The UAE has 3 major exchanges. Proponents to an amalgamation or consolidation of those exchanges say this would be an opportunity to put practicality and profits over, what is politics and pride, perhaps. Would you support regional consolidation of the exchanges, or is that a head fake?
This actually has been looked at on several occasions, and in fact, the guy that I worked for before at ADNOC was actually on a committee that looked at this very carefully, and at the end they changed their mind. So I suspect that this eventually happens. And why do I say that? Is it because I know something? No. It's because I believe that eventually the economics and the imperatives of efficiency outweigh other considerations. That's just a gut feel. It's not based on any inside knowledge.
So you think it's likely to happen?
I think so. I don't know when, though.
Okay. But it would make sense ultimately?
Yes.
Okay. Let's also quickly go back to cryptocurrencies, because this is huge interest to retail investors, something the country is also looking at with the development of a gov coin or a stable coin. What role will ADGM play in the development of the UAE as a cryptocurrency hub?
I think the role that ADGM should play is not to lead it, but it is to define a framework and to encourage innovation, but at the same time by being prudential. In other words, you don't want to be so open that you encourage cowboys to come in who end up scamming people. And if you look at the statistics in the US, there's been a considerable amount of scamming happening. So there the question is, who should be able to participate? In other words, which investors? And if you are a sophisticated investor and you pass a certain test, you should be able to decide for yourself what you want to do, including taking the risk, right? If you are a small investor who doesn't have a lot of expertise, and then you don't want to make it easy for people like that to make investments and then lose their money. So that's a real fine balance. I think that's what we should do, is to create the prudential framework to encourage innovation without hurting the people at the lower end of the food chain.
Do you see a day when Bitcoin or other alternative digital assets might become a means of exchange in the UAE? Are we going to be actually conducting transactions with Bitcoin and other digital currencies?
I think that eventually cryptocurrencies will be more mainstream. Now, the counter argument to that is not really, because there's enormous variability. How can something be a means of exchange or a store of value, which is the traditional kind of role that currencies play, given that you had Bitcoin, for instance, went from 60,000 to 40,000 in a flash. And I think that's a correct thought sort of formulation. But this asset class is now worth 2 trillion, and it's going to grow. I don't think it's going to disappear, because there are voices that say, "Oh, this is based on nothing, and it's a flash in the pan. It go away. It won't." So, to answer your question, I think eventually, and I don't know when though, because the central bank of the UAE is not really, I don't think they hold this view, but I don't think that they'll allow, this legal tender is the dirham. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure right now they're ready to do that. Mm. But I think at some point, yes. Mm.
Just to wrap up as well, I wanted to get your take again on how you see the economy and maybe even expanding out the global economy performing into 2022. Obviously, we spoke before about the progress that we're seeing through the recovery domestically, but I think globally the verdict is still out on what growth is going to look like. Where do we stand in the recovery right now?
Yeah, that's interesting, and really that's the question at hand, and which is being confronted and discussed particularly in the upper echelons of the central banks around the world, right? So this is topical for the Fed and for the European Central Bank and BOJ and so on and so forth. So the main concern right now that everyone has is the supply shocks have broken multiple supply chains. And for instance, in the US, you will see that in some of the big ports, there's a backup as long as 4 weeks, apparently, mm-hmm. to unload goods because they don't have enough ship unloading operators. And I'm not referring to, for instance, what's happening with the fuel shortages in the UK. That's kind of more localized. But there again, there's an issue of, there are not enough drivers. So there are these supply shocks. And if you look at, the price of oil, the price, of iron ore, the whole list of commodities, that have gone up versus wages, which have only gone up 4%. And CPI in the US was at, I think, 7+% annualized. So the concern is that, are we experiencing inflation? Are we going back to the 80s again? Or the 70s, actually, the 70s and the early 80s? Or is this a transitory phenomenon? It's a tough call right now. So I'm going to have to hedge what I say, because actually I'm not sure. I've been expecting inflation to pop up, and now that it has, and it's become a concern, I'm not as concerned, because I don't think that the central banks, and I lived through the 80s, I don't think that the central banks will validate it by allowing it to just sort of stay in the economy. In other words, they're beginning to taper, and they've already begun to taper. So I don't think the liquidity will allow for inflation to stay where it is and to increase from here. But that's the big question. So to get back to your question, I think you will have generalized growth. There will be issues. And I think later in the year, the economies will slow down, because you've got, again, the supply chain problem, I don't think gets validated in the broader economy. For instance, I don't think American consumers will tolerate buying things that are much more costly than they were, because their wages are not going up as much. Mm-hmm. So if wages were rising, then I would say, yes, you have that problem. Hmm.
Either way, we're watching closely. Mark, I really enjoyed the conversation today. Thanks for sharing your time and knowledge with us.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.